It is one of life's unpardonable offences, in Lord Peter Wimsey's estimation, to mistake a Chippendale for an empire, or to drape an antimacassar over the sloping arm of an Edwardian fauteuil. One might as well slap a bowler hat on the Venus de Milo. Too many women treat drawing rooms as if they were invalids, he was saying, idly brushing lint from his lapel. One cannot convalesce forever in chintz. Still, she was rather proud of her upholstery, came the dry rejoinder from Chief Inspector Parker, who was crouching beside the bed, scrutinizing the unfortunate inhabitant of room 7 at the Tinker's Hollow. Rest house for gentlewomen of limited means. Though I dare say this will give the committee something else to busy itself with. Wimsey leaned forward with feline delicacy, his monocle catching the weak shaft of afternoon sun filtered through tired net curtains. The corpse, female, elderly, and of the starchily respectable type, was curled on her right side, head sunk into the pillow as if pursuing a postprandial nap. Her silver hair was arranged with such fastidious care one might think she had gone to her reward, with curlers still in attendance. Only the slightly mottled hue of her cheek and the bluing tips of her fingers betrayed the inconvenient truth that Mrs. Maud Templeton was not merely asleep. "Rather reposeful, don't you think?" murmured Wimsey. "Like a woman who's decided at last to stop bothering." Parker grunted. Her maid found her like this after tea. No sign of a struggle, no screams in the night. The doctor says she likely died between 2 and 4 this morning. Heart, perhaps, though he can't quite commit to it yet. Which wouldn't be curious in the least, he added, if it weren't for this. He gestured to the neatly turned-down bedspread. Wimsey raised a blonde eyebrow. "A diligent chambermaid. Too diligent. None of the staff will admit to entering, and it wasn't like that yesterday evening." "I asked." Wimsey moved round the bed, glancing at the prim crocheted cover and its crisped edge, a single crease line betraying recent handling. He paused at the bedside table. There sat a half-read novel, Barriers of the Soul by Agatha Mallow, complete with bruised spine, a glass of water untouched, a bottle of sleeping salts, and a single glove. Only one. "No tray?" Wimsey asked. "No, apparently she hadn't been taking meals in her room." "And yet," murmured Wimsey, turning to study the sideboard and dresser, "I spy crumbs." He stooped, retrieving a single fragment of biscuit from the rug. "Ginger, I believe, the kind served only with the house's Tuesday tea service. Today, you say, is Wednesday." "Thursday," Parker corrected. "Ah, then a lady prone to hoarding. That or she had unexpected company 2 days past. Neither a cheerful prospect for a woman with a weak heart." From the hallway beyond drifted the voices of women attempting to sound, appropriately scandalized. "I should like to see the committee minutes," said Wimsey abruptly, "and the guest ledger. Also, I want to know who dusts the clocks here and when." Parker straightened. "Clocks? One always begins with the dusting," said Lord Peter. "You can't tamper with time until you know who's been cleaning it." And with that singular observation, he turned on his heel and departed the room, pausing only to replace the antimacassar he had previously removed. The parlour at Tinker's Hollow had the colour scheme of a hesitant apology. Its walls, pale lilac with a faint suspicion of mildew, hosted watercolours of uninspired gardens, and its lace curtains hung like discarded undergarments. Here, Lord Peter Wimsey was seated upon a chair far too squat for his gangling frame. One long leg crossed negligently over the other as he contemplated a plate of thinly sliced Madeira cake with the disinterested air of a man interrogating a weak alibi. Miss Harriet Tross, secretary of the Holmes Managing Committee and the type of woman who polished teaspoons before offering them to company, was leaning forward with an expression of earnest rectitude. "Mrs. Templeton had been a resident here for nearly 7 years, she was saying, and though her manner could be exacting, we never received any serious complaints. She had her routines. Breakfast in the dining hall, always at the east table. A daily walk with her stick only in dry weather. She detested the pianist, avoided bridge, and never attended chapel. She did insist on having the Times delivered, even though I'm not sure she actually read it. An unorthodox saint, murmured Whimsy. And she had no family? None living. Her brother died in India during the war. Her husband passed 30 years ago. She spoke fondly of a niece who visited once, though we never met her. Whimsy looked up from his cake, having consumed none of it. Fondly? That's rather rare for a woman so meticulous. She called her a wild bit of cream in a world of skimmed milk. Miss Tross allowed a tight smile, as if remembering had cost her something. But she never named her. Fascinating, said Whimsy, rising with an ease that seemed to make the armchair flinch. And the guest book? Just here, she said, opening a drawer from a bureau that tried hard to look Georgian but couldn't quite conceal its Woolworth's origins. I've marked the week in question. Whimsy ran a long finger down the page. Miss Lavinia Durrell, Reverend and Mrs. Harcombe, Miss Agate Vine. Good heavens, that sounds like something from a botanical sketch. Miss Vine collects moths, offered Miss Tross, a harmless eccentric. They never are, said Whimsy cheerfully. Tell me, do all guests sign in by hand? Unless they're brought in through the back. Deliveries, of course, or emergencies, but we've had no recent incidents of that kind. Whimsy flicked his eyes across the other entries. His finger paused. This Mrs. Lemarchand. I don't see a room listed. Miss Tross blinked. That's because she never stayed the night. She visited Mrs. Templeton 3 days ago, Tuesday. It was quite the excitement. No one had called on her in years. And yet she wasn't recorded as a niece. No, only as an acquaintance from Cheltenham. Did she leave an address? She didn't sign the book herself. One of the girls made the entry, and no one remembered to ask further. A tragic oversight, said Whimsy, closing the ledger with a snap. But all may not be lost. Miss Tross tilted her head. Do you believe she was involved? I believe she was here. Whether she intended to be remembered is another matter. Who's responsible for cleaning room 7? That would be Elsie Parsons. She's been with us 5 years. Honest, if a little timid. She may be precisely what we need. Let's speak with her. They found Elsie in the linen room, folding napkins with the seriousness of a postulant. She was small, with anxious eyes and hands permanently red from scrubbing. Morning, Miss Parsons, said Whimsy with cheerful solemnity. I hear you are the guardian of bedsheets and keeper of household truth. How terribly exhausting. She blinked. Sir. He means you're good at your job, Parker added, stepping in from the corridor. Oh, yes, sir. Leastways, I try. Whimsy leaned against the doorframe. Tell me, Elsie, did you tidy Mrs. Templeton's bed on Wednesday morning? No, sir. Why not? I was told not to disturb her. Who told you that? She hesitated. Well, no one really. The door was shut and she had her "Do Not Disturb" sign out. It's a little embroidered thing she made herself. I thought, well, she's having a lie-in. And the day before that? Tuesday. Oh, I made her bed then. As usual. You turned the bedspread. Always do. That's the proper way. Hospital corners. No creases. And it was undisturbed when you left? Perfect, sir. So if someone had turned it again, said Whimsy, it would have been after you. I suppose so. Now, said Whimsy, when did you last dust the mantel clock in her room? She frowned. Monday. It's on the rota. Did you notice the time then? No, sir. You should begin, said Whimsy kindly. It keeps one honest. Leaving her blinking in confusion, he turned to Parker. Let's have a look at that clock. Room 7 still bore the hush of its former inhabitant. Whimsy moved to the mantel, lifting the small brass carriage clock with gloved fingers. Stopped, said Parker. Indeed. Note the hands. 4:47. Yet the doctor estimates time of death between 2 and 4. Tampered with. Unlikely. More, probably, a disagreement between truth and habit. But mark this, Charles. It sits just off-center on the mantel. Dust ring proves it. It was moved. And not replaced precisely. That speaks of haste or unfamiliarity. Either would be interesting. Parker ran a hand through his hair. So someone visits Tuesday, stays unlogged, possibly overnight, though no staff confirm it, and leaves before dawn. Why stay hidden? Perhaps, said Whimsy, she was not meant to be there. Or perhaps she never left. You think the visitor killed her? I think, Whimsy said slowly, that someone turned the bedspread down with all the care of a nursemaid or a deceiver. Either way, they wanted us to believe she'd lain undisturbed. Parker glanced again at the bed. What do we do next? We find out who else knew of Mrs. Templeton's mysterious guest. And while we're at it, Charles, see if you can locate anyone in Cheltenham answering to the name Le Marchand. Ask about nieces, too, preferably wild ones. Whimsy smiled, then thinly. There's mischief afoot, and the dead, as always, are terribly unreliable witnesses. Lord Peter Whimsy took the narrow path that led from Tinker's Hollow's austere drawing-room into the quietly bustling back corridors, where the faint scent of starch mingled with the ever-present undertone of damp wool. Behind the muted doors, the household stirred with whispered conjectures and nervous glances. It was in such subdued atmospheres that secrets festered best, where small details, otherwise overlooked, took on the weight of portent. Whimsy's mind was occupied with the mystery of Mrs. Templeton's final hours. The turned-down bedspread, the stopped clock, the unaccounted-for visitor from Cheltenham, and the absent glove. All these particulars blended into a quietly maddening puzzle. He felt, as so often, that the truth lay not in the grand gestures, but in the small, almost trivial discrepancies of everyday life. The inquiry naturally directed itself towards the staff. Elsie Parsons, the diligent chambermaid, had offered a fragment of the truth, but what of the other women who moved through the house with their quiet competence? Whimsy found himself drawn to the kitchen, where a sharp-eyed housekeeper named Mrs. Gresham was overseeing the preparation of the evening meal. The kitchen, with its bubbling pots and fragrant steam, was a world apart from the hushed bedrooms and polished drawing-rooms. Mrs. Gresham, Whimsy began with his characteristic arch politeness, I wonder if you might assist in illuminating a rather dim corner of our little mystery. The woman, stout and brisk, wiped her hands on her apron and eyed him cautiously. If I can, sir. But I do wish this business would be over. It's unsettling, having the police and all about the place. I quite agree, said Whimsy. But truth, like the stew you're concocting, requires patience and careful stirring. She nodded. What do you want to know? Mrs. Templeton's habits, her routines, particularly in the days before her passing. Mrs. Gresham considered this. She was a creature of habit, that one, always her meals at the same time, her walks only in good weather, and her evenings spent in that parlor with a book. I saw her on Tuesday afternoon, sitting quietly by the window. She looked pale but determined to keep her dignity. Did she receive visitors often? Not many. A few came to see her when she first arrived, but in recent years she mostly kept to herself. That Mrs. Le Marchand was the first to visit in a long while, and it upset the house a bit. Upset? How so? Miss Tross was quite put out that Mrs. Le Marchand hadn't been properly logged, and there was talk among the staff. Some said she was a troublemaker from Cheltenham, but I never saw her. Mrs. Templeton kept her visits private. Whimsy allowed the word private to linger. Secrets like to hide behind such polite terms. Now, Mrs. Gresham, did you notice anything unusual in the house the night Mrs. Templeton died? The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. No loud noises, no visitors at odd hours. We all went to bed early. but the night staff said the front door was locked tight before lights out. Locked from inside, I presume? Yes, sir. No one could have come or gone without waking someone. A detail, then, if true, contradicted the possibility of an intruder slipping in unseen. Yet the turned bedspread suggested someone had been in Mrs. Templeton's room after the staff's last visit. Whimsy's thoughts flickered to the clock on the mantelpiece. If it was stopped at 4:47, yet death occurred between 2 and 4 a.m., then the clock had been moved after the fact. Who would have had the opportunity? The answer might lie with the night staff who, despite their invisibility during the day, carried the keys and knowledge of the house's rhythm. He sought out the night chambermaid, a pale, nervous girl named Nancy, who was just beginning her shift. Her hands trembled slightly as she answered his questions, but she confessed no knowledge of any visitor. "I locked the front door just after midnight," Nancy said, "and checked on Mrs. Templeton. She was asleep, or so I thought. The bed looked tidy and the sign was on the door." "Did you notice anything out of place? The clock, perhaps?" Nancy shook her head. "I didn't look at it. I was in and out quickly. I didn't want to disturb her." Whimsy made a note. The chambermaid's hesitation was natural, but her failure to check the clock was intriguing. Next, he considered the one glove found on the bedside table. Why only one? Gloves, like shoes, are rarely lost singly without reason. It could be a sign of struggle or merely a careless oversight. But knowing Whimsy's penchant for minutiae, it was surely significant. Turning his attention back to the ledger, Whimsy had given instructions to Inspector Parker to investigate Mrs. Lemarchand in Cheltenham. It was a lead that promised to unravel the carefully constructed facade of Tinker's Hollow. A brief exchange of telegrams followed, their curt official tone belying the potential explosion of secrets they might unleash. Meanwhile, Whimsy explored the guests' rooms, noting the details that might otherwise escape notice: curtains hanging unevenly, faint smells of lavender or tobacco, worn patches on carpets, and clocks set at slightly differing times. The minutiae were a chorus singing the truth beneath the house's polite whispers. He found himself in the sitting room that Mrs. Templeton favored, which bore evidence of recent occupancy. A faint indentation in the cushion and a thin layer of dust disturbed on the side table. On the table rested a small folded note, the ink smudged but legible: "Meet me Tuesday. The past cannot stay buried." Who had written this, and to whom was it addressed? Whimsy fingered the note, sensing that the threads of this mystery were entwined with the past's shadow, that Mrs. Templeton's final days were colored not merely by age and infirmity, but by secrets she had labored to keep. His thoughts were interrupted by Parker's arrival, breathless with news. "We've found Lemarchand, sir. A Miss Lavinia Lemarchand, aged 32, living in a modest flat on Cheltenham's outskirts. She's denied knowing Mrs. Templeton, but a neighbor confirms she mentioned an elderly relative she ought to visit more." "Curious denials," said Whimsy. "Prepare for a visit, Charles. I intend to discover if the wild cream indeed stains the skimmed milk of Tinker's Hollow." Together, they boarded the evening train, leaving behind the hushed corridors and pastel parlors of the rest house. The night settled over the countryside, wrapping them in its velvet mystery. Somewhere between the distant hills and the train's rhythmic clatter, the truth awaited, hidden in plain sight, just beneath a turned-down bedspread and a stopped clock. Whimsy, with a faint smile, fingered the single glove in his pocket, already anticipating the unraveling of human folly and quiet treachery. "For in the shadows of civility," he mused, "the dead speak loudest when the living dare not listen." And so the game was afoot. The Cheltenham flat that Miss Lavinia Lemarchand inhabited was a modest second-floor affair overlooking a narrow street that bore the usual scars of urban weariness. Cracked pavement, faded shop signs, and the occasional stray newspaper fluttering like a white flag of neglect. Inspector Parker, in his usual straightforward manner, knocked on the heavy wooden door while Whimsy lingered in the shadowed hall, his eyes quietly observing the worn edges of the carpet and the faint scent of boiled cabbage that clung stubbornly to the air. When the door opened, a woman emerged, a striking contrast to the drabness outside. Lavinia Lemarchand's eyes were sharp, her movements deliberate and controlled. She greeted them with an expression that might have been politeness or calculation. Whimsy preferred to reserve judgment until all cards were laid bare. "Miss Lemarchand, I am Lord Peter Whimsy," he said, inclining his head with a faint smile that suggested both charm and authority. "And this is Inspector Parker. We seek a few moments of your time concerning Mrs. Templeton." Lavinia's lips tightened, but she stepped aside to allow them entrance. The flat was tidy, though sparse. A single, well-worn armchair by the window, a small bookshelf cluttered with novels and pamphlets on horticulture, and a neatly kept writing desk. The place spoke of quiet endurance rather than comfort. "Mrs. Templeton was my aunt," Lavinia said shortly, eyes flicking to the inspector with a flash of something unspoken. "I last saw her 2 years ago, before she moved to Tinker's Hollow. Since then, our correspondence has been intermittent." "May I inquire as to the nature of your relationship with her?" Whimsy asked, easing into the chair opposite her. She hesitated, then sighed. "It was complicated. My aunt was a proud woman, fiercely private. We disagreed on many things, especially after my father's death. She never approved of my choice to become a writer, and I resented her disapproval. Still, I cared for her in my own way." Whimsy's eyes twinkled with dry amusement. "Family, as the bard reminds us, is a tangled skein indeed, and yet we often find the knots more easily untied than the strands themselves." Lavinia glanced at him sharply, but said nothing. "We have reason to believe that Mrs. Templeton received a visitor recently, someone who might have unsettled her," Whimsy continued, producing the folded note found at the rest house. "This message was left in her sitting room. Do you recognize the handwriting?" Lavinia took the note, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the words and a faint flush colored her cheeks. "It is mine," she admitted quietly. "I wrote it, though I meant to see her in person and never did. Why the caution? Why write instead of visit? Because the past between us is not easily revisited. I wished to reconcile, to understand why she cut me out of her life. But I feared rejection. After the letter, I was prepared to make a journey, but other matters intervened." "Other matters?" She shook her head. "It's complicated, Lord Whimsy. I won't trouble you with my troubles." But Whimsy, with a kindly yet probing gaze, persisted. "Troubles, Miss Lemarchand, are often the lodestones of truth. They draw us unwittingly toward the answers we seek." She bit her lip, then seemed to make a decision. "Very well. There is something you should know. My aunt possessed a family secret, one that might explain her isolation and the urgency of her recent days." Whimsy leaned forward, the faint scent of his cigar trailing in the air. "Please continue." Lavinia's voice dropped. "It concerns her late husband, whom she rarely spoke of. He was a man of influence, with a shadowed past. There were whispers, of course. Whispers that he was involved in questionable affairs, possibly even criminal. When he died, the family scattered, and my aunt withdrew completely." "And this secret," Whimsy pressed, "might someone have wanted to keep it buried?" "Indeed. And Mrs. Templeton had become anxious in the weeks before her death. She believed someone was watching her, perhaps from among those who wished to preserve that silence." The pieces clicked quietly in Whimsy's mind. The mysterious visitor from Cheltenham, the stopped clock, the turned bedspread, it all hinted at a confrontation long simmering beneath the surface. Yet one question remained. Who had the motive and opportunity to silence Mrs. Templeton? Before he could voice it, Parker interrupted with a message on his notebook. "Sir, we've been speaking with the local grocer and postman. Mrs. Templeton received a parcel on the day before her death. It was delivered from London, but contained only a single glove, the missing left from a pair. Wimsey's eyebrows rose. A single glove? A token, then, intended to unsettle or threaten? Most likely, sir. Wimsey stood, pacing the narrow room. Miss Le Marchand, did your aunt ever speak of enemies or former acquaintances who might harbour ill will? She mentioned a Mr. Charles Wentworth, Lavinia replied, an old business partner of her husband. Their relationship was fraught, though I know little beyond that. Charles Wentworth, Wimsey mused, a name worthy of further inquiry, a man with business entanglements and perhaps grudges. The inspector made a note to track down Wentworth's whereabouts, while Wimsey's gaze settled on a faint smudge on the writing desk. A half-erased cipher, perhaps, or a hastily scrawled number. He retrieved a magnifying glass from his pocket and examined the mark closely. The number 237 was faintly visible, written in pencil beneath a smear of ink. An address? A time? A code? Wimsey murmured. The significance will reveal itself in time. The conversation turned toward the family history, and Wimsey gleaned that the Templetons had once been wealthy, their fortune diminished by scandal and poor management. Mrs. Templeton's seclusion at Tinker's Hollow was both a retreat and a refuge. As the evening deepened, Wimsey prepared to leave, but Lavinia stopped him at the door. If I may offer one piece of advice, do not trust appearances. In our family, the masks are many, and none are as they seem. With a nod, Wimsey promised to pursue the lead and stepped out into the cool night. The street lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers reaching toward hidden truths. Back on the train, the rhythmic clatter of wheels provided a fitting counterpoint to Wimsey's ruminations. The gloves, the letter, the stopped clock, and the mysterious code all pointed toward a plot layered with deception and old wounds. Inspector Parker broke the silence. "Do you think Mrs. Templeton was murdered, sir?" "Certainly, Charles, but not in the crude fashion one might expect. The murderer chose subtlety, thrusting a single glove where it would be found, stopping a clock to mislead the time of death, and most tellingly, disturbing the bedspread to suggest a presence denied by others. Who then? Lavinia? That Wentworth fellow? Perhaps both or neither. Our suspect is likely to be someone weaving a web intricate enough to ensnare us all." Wimsey lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "The game grows richer, my dear Charles. Let us see which threads unravel first." As the train approached London, Wimsey's mind was already at work, piecing together a jigsaw puzzle whose final image remained maddeningly out of reach. Somewhere in the tangled web of family secrets, old grievances, and carefully crafted lies lay the answer to the mystery of the turned-down bedspread. And as always, Lord Peter Wimsey would be there to uncover it, one quietly devastating revelation at a time. The early morning fog hung low over London as Lord Peter Wimsey and Inspector Parker disembarked at Victoria Station, the chill dampness seeping into their coats and bones alike. The city's familiar bustle was muted beneath the grey veil, lending the streets an almost spectral quality, a fitting atmosphere for an investigation that seemed to grow murkier with every step. Wimsey adjusted his scarf and glanced sideways at Parker. "Charles, the question before us is not merely who had motive, but who had the precision and nerve to orchestrate such a carefully measured performance. The stopped clock, the glove, these are deliberate messages, not mere happenstance." Parker nodded, gripping his notebook tightly. "The glove, sir, is especially curious. A single left glove, you say? The missing piece from a pair?" "Yes," Wimsey confirmed, pulling from his pocket a small leather glove, supple and well-made, that had been recovered from Mrs. Templeton's flat. "Such an item is no casual token. It's an emblem, a cipher in leather." Their first destination was the address linked to the faint code, 2317. A visit to the post office revealed it was a box number at a small sorting facility in the East End, long known for its anonymity and shadowy clientele. There, a clerk provided the record of a parcel sent to Mrs. Templeton shortly before her death, an anonymous package bearing no return address, sent with deliberate secrecy. The glove was inside, the clerk said, and the parcel was sent by one C.W.'s. C.W., Whimsy murmured, the initials aligning uncomfortably with the name Charles Wentworth. A man who wishes to be seen, yet remain hidden. As they stepped back into the damp street, Parker ventured, "Do we have any record of this Wentworth?" "Indeed," Whimsy replied, unfolding a worn ledger from his briefcase. "Charles Wentworth was once a partner in a business that fell into ruin amid scandal. Reports suggest sharp practices, embezzlement perhaps. He vanished from public view some years ago. And the connection to Mrs. Templeton? She was said to be his only adversary, who knew the full extent of his transgressions. If she intended to expose him, or worse, revive old accusations, he would have every reason to be desperate." Their next stop was a discreet lodging house in Chelsea, where Wentworth was last known to reside. The landlady greeted them with guarded eyes and a hint of disdain. "Mr. Wentworth left abruptly, some weeks past," she said, wiping a handkerchief on her apron. "Kept to himself mostly, but I heard heated arguments late at night." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "Arguments? With whom?" "Couldn't say. No one saw, but there was a woman's voice, high and angry, and sometimes a man's deep growl. The image of a shadowy quarrel in the dead of night cast a chill, but Whimsy's mind searched beyond the surface. "Did he ever mention a Mrs. Templeton?" The landlady nodded. "Aye, he was obsessed with her, it seemed. Swore she'd ruined him." Back in the street, Whimsy lit a cigar, the smoke curling in lazy spirals above his head. "Obsessed men tend to be dangerous men, Inspector." They agreed to pursue Wentworth further, but their investigation was interrupted by a telegram delivered to Whimsy's club that afternoon. It bore a terse message from Lavinia Lemarchand. "Urgent meeting required. Information discovered. Come to Cheltenham." The urgency was unmistakable. Whimsy immediately arranged for travel, entrusting Parker with further inquiries in London. On arrival at Cheltenham, Whimsy found Lavinia waiting in the parlour of her modest flat, her expression taut with anxiety. "I've uncovered something, Lord Peter," she said without preamble. "Documents belonging to my aunt, letters, financial statements, and a diary." She handed over a small bundle, bound with a faded ribbon. Whimsy carefully unfolded the brittle pages, scanning the cramped handwriting. The diary spoke of fear and suspicion, chronicling Mrs. Templeton's growing dread that someone sought to strip her of the last remnants of her inheritance and silence her permanently. The financial papers revealed a tangled web of debts, transfers, and disputed ownership of an estate in Cornwall. "Here," Whimsy said, pointing to a passage dated 3 weeks prior to the murder. "Your aunt writes of an appointment with a solicitor to discuss the true heir." "The true heir," Lavinia repeated, brow furrowed. "A shadowy figure, perhaps a long-lost relative or an illegitimate claimant," Whimsy mused. "One who might unsettle the balance of power and motive." They spent hours poring over the materials, piecing together the story that Mrs. Templeton had guarded jealously, a secret lineage, obscured by legal maneuvers and silence. When Whimsy pressed Lavinia for more, she reluctantly admitted, "There were rumors of a child born out of wedlock, fathered by my aunt's husband before their marriage." "A scandal potent enough to ruin reputations and fortunes," Whimsy remarked dryly. "Exactly," Lavinia said. "And if this child or their descendants came forward, it could upset everything." That evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Whimsy's mind worked through the labyrinth of clues. The glove, the stopped clock, the disturbed bedspread, all were symbols in a ritual of concealment and accusation. But beneath the symbols lay a bitter human story of betrayal and inheritance. He confided to Lavinia, "The murderer is less concerned with the immediate crime than with protecting a legacy." "Then who?" she whispered. "Someone who feared exposure and who believed silence was the only safeguard." Before rest, Wimsey reviewed the timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Mrs. Templeton was by the vicar on the morning of the 2nd. The stopped clock suggested the murder occurred shortly after noon, yet the glove arrived the previous day, an ominous warning. "Someone planned this well," Wimsey said. "A performance, not a crime of passion." The next day, the solicitor Mrs. Templeton was to meet was located. A Mr. Harold Chesney, a man reputed for discretion and sharp legal mind. His office was a modest suite near the Inns of Court, smelling of leather-bound ledgers and stale pipe smoke. Chesney greeted Wimsey with cautious politeness. "I gather you are investigating the late Mrs. Templeton." "Yes. We understand she was to consult you about an inheritance matter." Chesney nodded slowly. "Indeed. She believed there was a rightful heir to be found, someone who might claim the Templeton estate. Was there such a person? Potentially. A young woman named Eleanor Gray, the supposed illegitimate daughter of Mr. Templeton. I've been gathering evidence on her background." Wimsey leaned forward. "And has Eleanor Gray come forward?" "No, she's cautious, aware of the social implications. But there are those who would wish to see her silenced." The solicitor's words confirmed Wimsey's suspicions. The murder was a preemptive strike, aimed at preventing exposure. Yet, as Wimsey walked away from Chesney's office, the question lingered: who among the known associates had the capacity for such cold calculation? The answer lay somewhere within the tangled lives of the Templeton circle: a jealous relative, a scorned former partner, or the shadowy Charles Wentworth. Wimsey resolved to pursue Wentworth's trail once more, sensing that the key to the puzzle was near. Back in Cheltenham, a chance remark by Lavinia brought a new perspective. "Charles Wentworth once threatened to ruin my aunt," she said quietly. "But I believe there was someone else, someone closer to home." Wimsey regarded her thoughtfully. "A family secret that cuts deeper than old grudges, perhaps?" She nodded. "My cousin, Edward Templeton. He stands to inherit if Eleanor Gray's claim fails." Ambition, a potent motive. As the pieces shifted and overlapped, the game was far from over. The gloves of deception were being shed, revealing hands stained with fear and desperation. Wimsey felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the certainty that behind every mask lay a truth waiting to be unearthed, and that soon the last thread would be pulled, unraveling the entire tapestry of lies. The days that followed settled into a careful rhythm, a delicate balance of shadow and light that seemed almost theatrical in its precision. Wimsey found himself navigating the subtleties of Cheltenham society, where every smile bore a hint of something withheld, and every word was measured to conceal as much as it revealed. It was in these interstices, the small hesitations and the cautious glances, that the true story lurked, waiting for the keen eye to discern its outline. Wimsey's attention returned repeatedly to Edward Templeton, the cousin whose presence had suddenly injected fresh tension into the already complicated affair. Lavinia's quiet suspicion of him seemed more than mere family loyalty clouded by grief. There was something sharper beneath her tone, a wariness born of long observation. Edward was a man whose charm rested on the surface, polished and practiced, yet whose eyes betrayed a restless ambition. The sort of man who could smile disarmingly in the drawing-room and scheme quietly behind closed doors. It was at the Templeton estate, a sprawling Georgian manor that bore the weight of generations, that Wimsey arranged his next visit. Edward greeted him with a composed ease, offering a firm handshake and an invitation to sit by the fire. The room was redolent of old money and older secrets, heavy velvet drapes, portraits whose eyes seemed to follow visitors, and the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingering like a whisper of past conversations. "Lord Peter, I presume?" Edward began, settling into a high-backed chair. "I hear you have taken an interest in poor Clarissa's untimely demise. It is a tragedy that has unsettled us all." "Indeed," Wimsey replied, allowing a faint smile to crease his lips. "But tragedy often reveals the fractures beneath the polished veneer of society." Edward's smile tightened imperceptibly. Fractures, or merely unfortunate circumstances? The police seemed keen to close the case on Wentworth's shoulders. "Wentworth is certainly a convenient scapegoat," Wimsey said mildly. "But convenience is no substitute for truth." A pause hung between them, filled only by the crackling fire. "You must understand, Lord Peter," Edward continued, "that our family has suffered enough. There is no need to dredge up old scandals, especially those involving my late uncle's indiscretions." "Old scandals sometimes hold the key to new crimes," Wimsey observed, "especially when an inheritance is at stake." Edward's gaze flickered momentarily. "Inheritance is a sordid business, but I assure you, I have no interest in murder." "Nor I, Mr. Templeton. Yet murder does have a way of drawing the interested parties into uncomfortable proximity." Wimsey's quiet irony seemed to unsettle Edward, who rose to pour himself a glass of brandy. "I trust you understand, then, that suspicion is a heavy burden, particularly when it falls unjustly." "I understand," Wimsey said softly, "and it is a burden I bear lightly, for my task is not to accuse lightly, but to uncover the reluctant truth." The conversation shifted then to lighter matters, but Wimsey's mind remained alert to subtle nuances, the carefully crafted phrases, the slight avoidance of certain topics, the glimmer of something unspoken. Afterward, Wimsey took a solitary walk in the estate's garden, where the trimmed hedges cast long shadows beneath the grey sky. It was here that the thought struck him sharply. The stopped clock in Mrs. Templeton's flat, the left glove, the coded parcel, all signs of a message, a ritualistic declaration rather than a haphazard clue. Whoever had sent them intended the victim to understand and fear. But who had the knowledge and opportunity to send such a message? And why choose a timepiece as a symbol? Wimsey's gaze drifted to the great clock tower visible from the garden's edge, a relic of the village church, its face frozen in time after years of neglect. Could the halted clock at Mrs. Templeton's home have mirrored this monument? A cryptic connection, perhaps, between the domestic and the public, the private grief and the communal facade. Later that evening, Parker joined Wimsey at the small inn where he was lodging. The inspector's brow was furrowed with the weight of his discoveries in London. "Wentworth's alibi is unraveling," Parker reported. "He was seen near the post office around the time the parcel was sent. No witnesses for the rest of the day, and a surprising absence from his usual haunts." "Curious," Wimsey murmured. "A man who slips like a shadow when the spotlight might expose him." "But there's more," Parker continued. "I found a letter in Wentworth's handwriting, addressed to Mrs. Templeton. It's a mixture of apology and threat. A strange combination." Wimsey unfolded the crumpled sheet. The letter was a curious blend of civility and menace, laced with an almost poetic bitterness. It spoke of debts unpaid and reputations tarnished, ending with a line that chilled the spine. "Silence is the price of peace, and peace is a fragile thing." "This," Wimsey said, "is the language of a man who feels cornered but not defeated. A man who believes he still holds the keys to control." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Lavinia, clutching a small parcel. "I found this among my aunt's things," she said breathlessly. "It's addressed to you, Lord Peter. I think she meant for you to have it if anything happened." Inside the package was a small notebook, bound in cracked leather, its pages dense with tiny, meticulous handwriting. Whimsy's eyes scanned the contents rapidly. It was a journal of observations made by Mrs. Templeton herself. Here, in these intimate notes, lay the unseen texture of her final days, descriptions of secret meetings, names whispered under breath, and a recurring phrase that struck a particular chord: the theater of deception. Mrs. Templeton had suspected that those around her were playing roles, donning masks to conceal motives. The journal hinted at alliances and betrayals among family members and associates, none of which matched the outward appearances. One entry, dated just 2 days before her death, read, "Edward smiles too easily. His words carry weight, but his eyes reveal the hollowness beneath. Charles's shadow looms, but there is a third, an unseen player." The mention of a third was new and unsettling. Whimsy looked up, eyes sharp. "It seems our mystery grows a companion, one hiding behind the curtains." Lavinia's voice trembled. "Who could it be? Someone we haven't considered." "Precisely," Whimsy said, "and it is this unseen actor that we must unmask before the stage collapses entirely." The following morning, Whimsy requested an audience with the vicar of Cheltenham, a man well acquainted with the social undercurrents of the parish. The vicar, Reverend James Hollis, was a tall figure with a gentle demeanor and a keen intelligence beneath his clerical calm. Mrs. Templeton was a frequent visitor to the parish, Hollis explained. Often troubled, she confided in me her fears and suspicions. She believed the old family secrets would resurface with dire consequences. Did she mention this third person? Hollis nodded slowly. Yes. She hinted at someone close, someone trusted, who manipulated events from the shadows. Whimsy tapped his fingers thoughtfully. A puppet master. The Reverend hesitated. There is one who fits that description, but it would be scandalous to name him. Truth is rarely scandalous, Reverend, only inconvenient. Hollis glanced around, then lowered his voice. Mr. Arthur Pendlebury, the estate's long-time steward. He commands great influence over the family affairs and is known for his discreet management of delicate matters. Whimsy's mind raced. The steward was the unseen hand that guided the family's fortunes, the keeper of secrets and gatekeeper of access. "It seems we have found our third," Whimsy said quietly. "A man with motive, means, and opportunity. But what was his role in the death of Mrs. Templeton? Was he protector, predator, or pawn?" As Whimsy left the vicarage, the fog had lifted, but the chill remained. The game had changed, and the players were revealing themselves in unexpected ways. Each new revelation was a step closer to the final act, where the masks would fall and the true face of betrayal be laid bare. Yet, in this carefully crafted theater of deceit, Whimsy knew that appearances could deceive most cunningly, and only the patient eye would discern the truth hiding in plain sight. Whimsy returned to the Templeton estate with a sharpened sense of purpose, the steward, Arthur Pendlebury, now occupying the forefront of his thoughts. The long corridors of the manor seemed to echo with silent tensions as he approached the steward's quarters, a modest suite tucked discreetly near the service wing. It was a place that reflected Pendlebury's position, not quite family, yet essential to the household's inner workings. The door opened before Whimsy could knock, revealing a man of middling years, with a face weathered by duty and eyes sharp with habitual calculation. Pendlebury's expression was measured, courteous but guarded. "Lord Peter Whimsy, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he inquired, stepping aside to admit his visitor. "I wish to speak with you about Mrs. Templeton," Whimsy began, folding his hands behind his back. "Your name has arisen in conversation, Mr. Pendlebury. Naturally, in matters of family and estate, your involvement is considerable." Pendlebury nodded. "I've served the Templetons for over 20 years. I know their affairs intimately." "And their secrets?" Whimsy pressed gently. The steward's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Secrets, my lord, are a luxury few can afford. I keep what I must and reveal only what is necessary. Yet your discretion might conceal more than mere loyalty, Wimsey said thoughtfully. Mrs. Templeton feared for her safety, as you may know. She believed that the past might unravel her present. Pendlebury's gaze flickered. I was aware of her concerns, yes, but I never imagined the worst. Did you see her on the day of her death? Wimsey asked. Pendlebury's reply was swift. I did in the morning. She was tense but resolute. She spoke of a letter she had received, one that threatened to expose old wrongs. A letter, Wimsey echoed. Did she show it to you? No, I was not privy to its contents. She was cautious, afraid that its discovery would bring ruin to us all. Wimsey made a note of this carefully. The letter could be a vital piece in the puzzle, a weapon or a shield. Mr. Pendlebury, Wimsey continued, your position grants you considerable influence over the household. Would you say you had any reason to act against Mrs. Templeton? The steward's composure did not falter. No, I served her faithfully, but I confess I feared that the revelations she sought to unearth might tear the family apart. Fear can drive men to desperate acts, Wimsey said quietly. And yet you say you did not harm her. No, Pendlebury replied firmly. I may be many things, Lord Peter, but a murderer I am not. The conversation left Wimsey with more questions than answers. Pendlebury was a man who lived in the grey shadows, loyal to the family yet burdened by its secrets. His motives were tangled in the very web of deception they sought to unravel. Leaving the steward, Wimsey pondered the significance of the mysterious letter Mrs. Templeton had mentioned. It was vital to obtain that document, for within its lines might lie the truth that had cost her life. Meanwhile, Parker had been making progress of his own back in London. A breakthrough came when a clerk at the post office identified the sender of the parcel containing the glove. The handwriting matched that of a lesser-known associate of Charles Wentworth, one who had vanished under suspicious circumstances years before. Wimsey received Parker's report by telegram, the terse lines crackling with new urgency. Associate identified. Name Miriam Fawcett, former secretary to Wentworth. Last seen in Brighton. Possible link to estate dealings. Brighton, an entirely new direction, yet one that fit snugly into the expanding map of intrigue. Without delay, Wimsey arranged to travel to the coastal town, where the sea air promised a sharp contrast to the fog-laden streets of London and Cheltenham. The town's bustle was tinged with a saltiness that seemed to cleanse the mind even as it stirred new mysteries. At a modest boarding house near the pier, Wimsey found Miriam Fawcett, a woman in her late 30s whose sharp gaze and purposeful demeanor suggested a life lived with both resilience and caution. She received him in the parlor, where the wallpaper was faded and the furniture worn but orderly. "You're investigating Mrs. Templeton's death?" Miriam asked without preamble. "I suppose you want to know about Charles Wentworth." "Yes," Wimsey replied. "He was your employer?" "For a time," she said. "A difficult man, brilliant but ruthless. I left when his dealings took a darker turn." "Did you know of his connection to Mrs. Templeton?" She hesitated. There was more between them than business. Old debts, old grievances. He feared she might ruin him. Did he ever threaten her? Miriam's eyes flashed. "Not in words, but in actions. I found letters he sent, thinly veiled warnings, hints that he controlled more than people realized." Wimsey leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Miriam swallowed. "He had contacts, allies willing to act on his behalf. When he disappeared, I feared the worst." "Do you know where he is now?" She shook her head. "No one knows, but I've always suspected he's close, watching, waiting." Her words cast a shadow over the investigation, a ghost lurking just beyond reach. Before leaving Brighton, Wimsey examined a package Miriam handed over, a small bundle of correspondence between Wentworth and various unknown recipients, filled with coded language and veiled threats. Back in Cheltenham, Wimsey's arrival was met with guarded eyes. He convened with Lavinia and Parker to piece together the new fragments of the puzzle. It seems Wentworth's reach extends far beyond what we imagined, Wimsey concluded, and Mrs. Templeton's murder was a desperate attempt to silence the truth before it emerged. But what of Edward Templeton and the steward? Parker asked. They both had motives. Indeed, Wimsey admitted. This case is a tangle of personal ambition, old grudges, and shadowy threats. Our task is to untie the knots carefully, lest we mistake a symptom for the cause. The night deepened as Wimsey sat by the fire, turning over every detail in his mind. The glove, the stopped clock, the threatening letters, all were pieces in a complex design. A sudden insight struck him. The missing half of the glove might have been worn by the murderer, a calling card, a sign of ownership over the crime. But more than that, the halted clock signaled not just the time of death, but a moment frozen in deception. Tomorrow, Wimsey knew, he would confront the true architect of this dark theater, someone who had played their role with chilling precision, hoping the final curtain would fall before the truth could reach the stage. And yet, as always, the game was far from over. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the hedgerows as Wimsey made his way back to the Templeton estate, his thoughts still swirling with the revelations from Brighton. Miriam Fawcett's testimony and the bundle of cryptic correspondence had opened new avenues, but also deepened the mystery, weaving an ever more intricate web. The interplay between Charles Wentworth's vanished presence and the family's internal dynamics was like a game of shadows, each player hiding intentions behind carefully measured expressions. Lavinia met him at the gate, her face pale but resolute. "Lord Peter, I'm glad you've returned. There's something I must show you, something I discovered last night among Aunt Clarissa's things." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a fierce determination beneath it. Wimsey followed her inside, through the familiar halls, to a small private study that had once belonged to Mrs. Templeton. There, she produced a worn leather envelope sealed with wax, the mark faint but unmistakable. "I found this hidden in the false bottom of her writing desk. It's addressed to you, but she never sent it." With careful fingers, Wimsey broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Clarissa's. Elegant yet hurried, laden with urgency. It began with a recounting of her fears and suspicions, then moved on to name individuals she believed were complicit in a conspiracy stretching far beyond the family's immediate sphere. But it was the closing lines that chilled Wimsey most. "If anything should happen to me, Lord Peter, follow the trail to the docks. There, truth hides in the shadows of departure." The docks, a place of transit, escape, and secrecy. It was a lead that promised new revelations but also peril. That afternoon, with Parker and Lavinia accompanying him, Wimsey made his way toward the Cheltenham docks. The river gleamed dully beneath the low sun, the cries of gulls mixing with the distant clang of cranes and the faint murmur of cargo being loaded. The area was a labyrinth of warehouses, shipping offices, and narrow alleys, a far cry from the polished drawing rooms they had frequented. Yet here, in the grime and bustle, the real story seemed to pulse beneath the surface. Wimsey's keen eyes scanned the scene, noting the faces of dock workers, stevedores, and clerks, each a potential witness or suspect. Their clothing was worn and practical, their conversations low and guarded. They soon found the office of Mr. Halbrook, a shipping agent who had handled shipments for various local families, including the Templetons. Halbrook was a stout man with a jovial manner that belied the sharpness in his eyes. "Yes, I know the Templetons," Halbrook said, offering a firm handshake, "and Charles Wentworth, too. Tricky fellow, that one. Did you notice anything unusual in the shipments around the time of Mrs. Templeton's death?" Wimsey inquired. Halbrook frowned, tapping his fingers on the desk. There was a crate that never arrived, supposed to contain documents, I heard whispers. Someone intercepted it, and it vanished without a trace. Documents, Parker prompted. Old family papers, records that could be used as leverage. Wentworth had a habit of dealing in secrets. Wimsey's mind raced. Could the missing crate contain evidence vital to understanding the murder? Had Mrs. Templeton's fears been well-founded? Before they could press further, a rough voice interrupted. "Looking for something, my lords?" A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with a hardened gaze and a scar slicing across his cheek. Halbrook's joviality vanished. "Jonas, this is Lord Peter Wimsey. We're investigating the death of Mrs. Templeton." Jonas sneered. "Ain't my business, that one. But if you're poking around where you shouldn't, you might find trouble." Wimsey regarded him calmly. "Perhaps, but sometimes trouble reveals the truth." Jonas spat on the ground. "Truth's a luxury on these docks. Money and power make the rules." The tension thickened, but before it could escalate, Halbrook stepped in smoothly. "Jonas, be reasonable. We're here to help." Wimsey made a note of Jonas's warning. Threats were common in investigations, but the dock workers' words suggested more than mere hostility. They hinted at a protective secrecy. Around the missing crate. Determined to follow this lead, Wimsey and his companions moved to the warehouse district. The buildings were long and shadowed, their facades scarred by years of salt and soot. Inside one dimly lit warehouse, Wimsey spotted a pile of crates, some marked with the Templeton insignia. Carefully, he examined the labels and found one crate that seemed out of place, its markings crudely altered, the seal broken. Parker pried it open to reveal a cachem of documents, ledgers, letters, and legal papers. Wimsey sifted through the papers, his eyes catching a document that bore the unmistakable signature of Charles Wentworth. It detailed a series of illicit financial arrangements and hinted at forged contracts designed to manipulate the family's inheritance. "This is it," Wimsey said softly. "The proof of a conspiracy that Mrs. Templeton sought to expose." Lavinia gasped, clutching the papers tightly. No wonder she was afraid. Suddenly, a noise startled them. A footstep echoed nearby. They turned to see Jonas, standing at the entrance, blocking their escape. "You found what I warned you not to," he growled. Wimsey stepped forward, unflinching. "You're protecting someone, Jonas." "Why?" Jonas's eyes flickered with conflict. "I've got my reasons. Some debts don't wash away easily." Parker moved cautiously. "Help us, Jonas. You can make this right." After a long pause, Jonas's shoulders slumped. "All right. There's someone higher up pulling strings. Arthur Pendlebury. He's been covering tracks, keeping the family in line through threats and fear." Wimsey's pulse quickened. The steward's name had surfaced again, confirming suspicions. With Jonas's reluctant cooperation, Wimsey returned to the estate to confront Pendlebury. The steward awaited them in the great hall, his composure betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "You have some explaining to do," Wimsey said steadily. "The documents, the threats, the attempt to silence Mrs. Templeton, all point to you." Pendlebury's face remained impassive. "You mistake my actions for villainy. I have protected the family from ruin." "By silencing the truth?" Wimsey pressed. "For their good. Some secrets are too dangerous to surface." "But not dangerous enough to kill for," Wimsey challenged. For a moment, Pendlebury's mask cracked, revealing a flicker of desperation. "You don't understand the stakes." "I think I do," Wimsey said, "and I believe justice must prevail." Before Pendlebury could reply, Lavinia stepped forward. "You took from us our peace, our trust, and my aunt's life." The steward's gaze fell. "I only did what was necessary." Parker signaled to his men, and Pendlebury was placed under arrest. As the gravity of the moment settled, Wimsey allowed himself a quiet satisfaction. The web of deception was unraveling, exposing the dark undercurrents that had threatened to consume the Templeton family. Yet as he looked to Lavinia and Parker, he knew the final act was still to come. The full truth, the unvarnished reality, awaited discovery, and with it, the promise of closure for all involved. The arrest of Arthur Pendlebury sent ripples through the Templeton estate, and though the immediate threat seemed contained, Wimsey knew the case was far from closed. As the steward was led away under Parker's watchful eye, an unsettling silence filled the great hall. Lavinia stood beside Wimsey, her face a blend of relief and sorrow, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon her. "It is as if a shadow has lifted," she said quietly, "yet the house still feels haunted." Wimsey nodded, recognizing that while one piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, the broader picture remained incomplete. The intercepted letters and hidden ledgers hinted at a conspiracy reaching beyond Pendlebury's machinations. There was a puppeteer yet unseen, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. That evening, as the household settled into an uneasy calm, Wimsey sat in the library poring over the papers, recovered from the warehouse. The coded language in Wentworth's letters teased at alliances with powerful figures in the city's political and financial circles. These shadows were not easily penetrated. A sudden knock at the door interrupted his focus. Lavinia entered, her eyes bright with determination. "Lord Peter, I've spoken with Miriam Fawcett again. She has information that might illuminate the final link in this chain." Wimsey gestured for her to continue. Curiosity piqued. "She mentioned a meeting that took place shortly before my aunt's death," Lavinia explained. "A clandestine gathering at a private club in London. Wentworth and Pendlebury were both present, along with others whose names are unfamiliar to me." "A private club," Wimsey murmured. "A perfect venue for conspiracies to take root, shielded by wealth and influence." The next morning, Wimsey and Parker set out for London, determined to uncover the identities of these shadowy figures. The club, nestled in a discreet corner of Mayfair, was an imposing building, its facade an austere mask concealing the opulence within. Upon arrival, Wimsey requested admission under the guise of a gentleman seeking membership. The doorman scrutinized him, but the subtle markers of class and confidence granted passage. Inside, the club's atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and muted conversations, the air vibrating with quiet power. Wimsey's eyes swept the room, noting the varied faces of the elite. Bankers, politicians, industrialists, all woven into the fabric of London's high society. A waiter approached with a discreet nod, handing Wimsey a note. It read, "Follow the path. Truth lies beneath the surface." Intrigued, Wimsey followed the instructions to a side door leading down a narrow staircase. The descent brought him to a private lounge, where a small gathering convened in hushed tones. Among them were faces that matched the descriptions from the letters. One man, tall and impeccably dressed, caught Wimsey's attention, a Mr. Alistair Graves, known for his ruthless dealings in finance. Beside him sat Lady Marjorie, a socialite whose charm masked a sharp political acumen. Wimsey observed as the group exchanged envelopes and spoke in coded language about containment and exposure. The implication was clear. Mrs. Templeton's death was part of a larger scheme to suppress damaging revelations that threatened to topple alliances. He surreptitiously recorded snippets of conversation, each word further unraveling the network of deceit. Suddenly, a hand touched his shoulder. He turned to see Miriam Fawcett, her expression a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "They know you're here," she whispered urgently. "We must leave before we're caught." Wimsey nodded, following her up the stairs and out into the London fog. The city swallowed them quickly, but the knowledge gained was a heavy burden. Back at their lodgings, they pieced together the fragments. The conspiracy reached into the highest echelons, implicating not only Pendlebury, but powerful men and women who had much to lose. Mrs. Templeton's attempt to expose them had made her a target. Yet there was one final question. Who had delivered the fatal blow? Pendlebury had been the steward and enforcer, but the mastermind had remained elusive. Wimsey's mind returned to the stopped clock at the crime scene, a symbol of a moment frozen in time, deliberately staged. Could it be a message? A signature? His thoughts turned to Edward Templeton, the seemingly distant son. Was his indifference genuine, or a mask concealing darker ambitions? Determined to confront Edward, Wimsey arranged a meeting at the estate. The young man arrived, composed yet guarded. "Lord Peter," Edward greeted, his tone polite but distant. "I must ask about your relationship with your mother," Wimsey began. "Was there discord?" Edward hesitated. "Mother and I had our differences, but I loved her." "And her investigation into these letters," Wimsey pressed. "Were you aware?" Edward's gaze sharpened. "She involved herself in matters beyond her understanding. I warned her to stop." "Why?" Wimsey inquired. "Because it threatened the family name. Secrets sometimes best remain buried." Wimsey studied him carefully, sensing the simmering tension beneath the words. "Did you fear what she might uncover?" Edward's jaw tightened. "Perhaps." The conversation ended with a promise to stay in contact, but Wimsey suspected Edward's role was more complicated. That night, a breakthrough came when Parker discovered that the glove found at the scene was part of a pair commissioned specially, one designed to fit Edward's hand perfectly. The evidence was damning. Wimsey confronted Edward the following morning, presenting the glove and confronting him with the growing case. Faced with the weight of truth, Edward's facade cracked. He confessed to confronting his mother in a desperate bid to stop her. The argument had escalated, and in a moment of rage, he struck her, unintended to kill, but fatal nonetheless. The staging of the scene, the stopped clock, the missing glove half, had been a clumsy attempt to misdirect. Edward's remorse was genuine, but overshadowed by the irrevocable damage. With the mystery resolved, the web of deceit unraveled, and the Templeton family could begin the slow process of healing. Wimsey's thoughts lingered on the fragile balance of power and secrets, a reminder that even in the most refined circles, darkness could hide just beneath the surface. The morning sun cast long, hesitant shadows across the Templeton estate as Wimsey prepared to finalize the investigation. The revelation of Edward's culpability had stunned the family, yet beneath the surface, a quiet tension lingered. The surface truth was clear, but Wimsey knew the layers beneath were yet to be fully exposed. The question that gnawed at him now was how far the web of deceit truly extended, and what the cost of unraveling it would be. Edward sat quietly in the drawing room, his hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the window. The weight of his confession seemed to age him, but there was a flicker in his gaze, perhaps guilt or something darker, something unresolved. Wimsey approached gently, aware that the final moments of any investigation were as delicate as the first. "Edward," Wimsey began, voice measured, "your confession brings clarity, yet there remain unanswered questions that must be addressed for true justice to be served. There are those who believe that your actions were influenced or even manipulated by others within the family or their associates." Edward's eyes sharpened, a subtle defensive edge to his posture. "Manipulated? By whom?" "That is precisely what I intend to discover," Wimsey replied. "You see, motives rarely exist in isolation. They ripple outward, drawing others into their currents. I believe that Arthur Pendlebury, as steward, acted not alone but as part of a larger mechanism, a mechanism perhaps controlled by someone who sought to protect their own interests at any cost." Edward's expression flickered momentarily with surprise before settling into guarded silence. Wimsey continued, "We must consider Lady Templeton's own fears. Her letters spoke of conspiracies, of dangerous liaisons beyond the immediate family circle. people in positions of power who would stop at nothing to preserve their dominion. The room was heavy with quiet contemplation. Then, as if compelled by a sudden resolve, Edward leaned forward. "There is one person I have yet to speak of openly. My mother's confidant, Lady Marjorie Graves. She was close to my mother, but also close to those who wield influence in London. I never trusted her completely." Wimsey nodded, sensing the thread that might lead to the heart of the darkness. "Lady Marjorie's name has come up repeatedly in my inquiries. She is known for her charm and discretion, yet those traits can mask far more dangerous qualities." "We must speak with her directly," Edward said, the tension in his voice betraying a mixture of fear and determination. That afternoon, Wimsey, Parker, and Edward made their way to a discreet townhouse in Mayfair, where Lady Marjorie Graves resided. The place was impeccably maintained, the epitome of quiet elegance, but the atmosphere carried an unmistakable chill beneath its refined surface. Lady Marjorie greeted them with a cool smile, her demeanor composed yet alert. "Lord Peter Wimsey," she said smoothly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Wimsey returned the greeting with his customary charm, but kept his gaze steady. "Lady Marjorie, I come with questions that require frank answers. The death of Lady Templeton, the conspiracies that surround her, and the dangerous secrets that have come to light." Her smile tightened. "A tragedy, certainly, but I assure you, I have nothing to hide." "Then perhaps you can explain your presence at the club the night before Lady Templeton's death," Wimsey said calmly, watching her carefully. Lady Marjorie's eyes flickered with a flash of irritation, quickly masked. "I attended many social events that evening. It was hardly unusual." Wimsey pressed on. "Your conversations with Mr. Wentworth and Mr. Pendlebury, your involvement in discussions about containment and exposure, these terms suggest a deliberate effort to suppress the truth." Marjorie's facade cracked briefly, her voice lowering. "Sometimes preservation demands sacrifice. The stability of families like the Templetons depends on discretion. My role has always been to safeguard that. But at what cost?" Wimsey's tone was gentle but firm. Lady Templeton's life was the ultimate price. For a moment, silence hung heavily between them. Then Lady Marjorie's composure returned. "If you seek a villain, Lord Peter, look to the desperation of those closest to the truth. The family's secrets are tangled and painful. Perhaps some truths are better left buried." Before Wimsey could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the hall. A footman entered, handing Lady Marjorie a note. She glanced at it, her face paling imperceptibly. "Excuse me," she murmured, retreating to a private room. Wimsey exchanged a glance with Edward and Parker. Something was amiss. Waiting for a few minutes, they heard hurried footsteps and a door slam. Lady Marjorie reappeared, composed once more but visibly shaken. "I must request your understanding. Matters of great delicacy require my immediate attention. Perhaps you would allow us to accompany you," Wimsey offered. "No," she said firmly. "But I promise to cooperate fully with your investigation." Leaving the house, Wimsey felt a growing unease. Lady Marjorie was a skilled player, but her true hand was still hidden. He resolved to probe deeper, suspecting that the note she had received might offer a clue to the wider conspiracy. That night, back at the estate, Wimsey studied the patterns emerging from his investigation. The network of influence and control extended far beyond initial appearances, involving a circle of powerful individuals whose ambitions intertwined with the fate of the Templeton family. A breakthrough came when Parker reported intercepting a letter addressed to Lady Marjorie, arranged covertly through a trusted courier. The contents revealed a plan to discredit Wimsey's investigation, involving forged evidence and public scandal designed to undermine the family's honor and halt further inquiry. Armed with this knowledge, Wimsey formulated a plan to confront the conspirators publicly, cutting through the veils of deception. The following evening, he arranged a gathering of key figures from the family and their circle under the guise of a memorial for Lady Templeton. As the guests assembled in the grand hall, whispers filled the air, the tension palpable. Wimsey began with a measured recounting of the known facts, carefully outlining the evidence uncovered. Then, with deliberate precision, he revealed the intercepted letter and its implications, exposing the conspiracy to discredit the investigation. Faces shifted, some blanching with shock, others masking anxiety with practiced ease. Turning to Lady Marjorie, he said softly but firmly, "The web of lies has been spun tightly, Lady Marjorie, but even the most intricate patterns unravel under scrutiny." She met his gaze steadily, the mask of poise faltering briefly. "You may have uncovered much, Lord Peter, but there are depths you cannot fathom." "Then help me fathom them," Wimsey replied, "for the truth must prevail, not only for Lady Templeton, but for the honor of all involved." A heavy silence followed. Then, as if released by an unseen signal, Lady Marjorie sighed and began to speak. Not with defiance, but with a reluctant clarity that confirmed much of what Wimsey suspected. The tangled ambitions, the desperate acts to protect power, and the tragic consequences that had led to murder. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of her revelations, yet within them lay the promise of justice and, perhaps, redemption. As the night deepened, the final pieces of the puzzle came into focus. Wimsey knew that the path ahead would be difficult, marked by shattered alliances and painful truths, but it was a path that must be walked to restore balance. The mystery that had haunted the Templeton estate was at last drawing to a close, but the echoes of its secrets would resonate long after the last word was spoken. The gathering in the great hall had thinned. Only a handful remained, their faces etched, with exhaustion and the weight of truths reluctantly unveiled. Lord Peter Wimsey stood near the hearth, the flickering firelight casting angular shadows across his composed features. The time had come to lay bare the final threads of this tangled tapestry. "My friends," he began, voice calm yet unmistakably commanding, "we have traversed a labyrinth of secrets, half-truths, and guarded silences. It is now incumbent upon me to illuminate the path that led to Lady Templeton's untimely demise, a path obscured by deliberate misdirection and human frailty." He paused, eyes sweeping over the assembled group. The bereaved family, the servants, and Lady Marjorie Graves, whose poised mask had cracked enough to reveal the strain beneath. "The bedspread found turned down on the morning of the murder," Wimsey continued, "was not a mere happenstance of disturbed rest. It was, in fact, the critical clue that unraveled the entire mystery." A soft murmur ran through the room, and Wimsey allowed it to settle before proceeding. Lady Templeton's chamber was meticulously maintained, yet the turned-down bedspread indicated someone's deliberate interference, a message, if you will, that all was not as it seemed. It revealed that the killer had entered the room after the household retired, carefully arranging the scene to suggest an innocent repose. He drew forth a slender envelope from his coat pocket, the edges crisp and purposeful. Contained within were letters, secret correspondences revealing blackmail, coercion, and betrayal. Most importantly, they implicated Mr. Edward Templeton as the man who, driven by desperation and manipulation, committed the act. Edward's gaze dropped, but Wimsey's eyes held no trace of triumph, only the somber clarity of justice. "But the truth does not end there," Wimsey added. "Edward was but a pawn in a game far grander, orchestrated by none other than Lady Marjorie herself. Her cultivated charm masked a ruthless ambition. The intercepted letter revealed her intention to control the Templeton legacy by silencing opposition and casting blame where it would do the most damage." Lady Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line, but her composure remained intact. The soundproof door in the east wing, the misaligned clocks that distorted timelines, and the supposedly random social gatherings, all were carefully engineered distractions. Whimsy explained. Lady Marjorie's meticulous planning was undone only by one overlooked detail: the faint scent of lavender on the bedspread, a scent unique to a rare soap only used by Lady Templeton herself. He turned to Edward. You were manipulated into believing your actions were your own. Your confession, though painful, was the first step towards redemption. Edward nodded slowly, relief and remorse mingling in his eyes. Whimsy faced the assembly one last time. Let this be a lesson that even in the most polished of settings, beneath the veneer of civility, passions and deceptions stir as darkly as anywhere. Justice requires not only evidence, but courage to confront the uncomfortable truths. The room remained silent, the weight of his words settling like dust in the quiet air. As the guests dispersed, Whimsy allowed himself a moment's reflection. The game was played, the pieces laid bare. He lit a fine Havana cigar, exhaling a thin plume of smoke that curled with a languid grace. "Ah, the peculiar perversities of human nature," he murmured to Parker, who stood nearby. "One might almost believe the devil himself penned this little drama, if one were not so certain that mankind, in all his complexity, is quite capable of such mischief unaided." With a final arch of his brow, Whimsy turned towards the door, leaving behind a house that would, in time, find peace once more. And so, the mystery of the turned bedspread was laid to rest, not with supernatural flourish, but with the clear, unyielding light of reason and a touch of British irony that only Lord Peter Whimsy could deliver.